Welcome back to Virtual California Festival of Speed with me, Lara, ThatPorscheGirl. My guest for this segment is somebody you probably know and who's a pretty amazing guest to have agreed to talk with me. His name is Rod Emory. Welcome, Rod. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so nice to meet you, unfortunately, under these circumstances, virtually, because I've actually met your family. I was at your Lit Week open house, and I saw you surrounded by people as usual. There was so many people there, so I wanted to get a chance to say hello to you, but it was pretty much you and the swarm of people going around you, so I didn't get a chance to say hi.
I'm glad you made it to the open house. Yeah, we had about 3,000 people, so it was definitely madness and a lot of fun, though.
Yeah, and I noticed your whole entire family is a part of it, and that I think your daughter was working T-shirts. I met Zane I was with Jen, G.I. Jen, for people who don't know what I'm talking about. And so we were talking with him, and this really cute girl walked up, and I assumed it was his girlfriend or his sister, and it was your wife. So I thought it was really funny. I go, "Oh wait, you're his mom?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, she's so cute." So it was really nice meeting them. They're such a nice family, and I saw his car and heard about his acting stuff. So it was really cool to get to know your family as well.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
So how are you holding up? What's going on?
You know, I'm doing good. It's been emotionally kind of a little bit of a roller coaster for me because, you know, I'm so used to having my entire crew here and a very active, you know, workshop with 15 guys in the shop and my wife and kids here. And you know, right now it's me and my wife and kids are here about every other day to just keep me company. But, you know, all the employees are home safe. They went home March 19th, and we made sure they all had pay and some cash in their pockets just so that they didn't have to worry about any of this and go home and just focus on their health and family. But, you know, they're all going stir crazy. They're all, you know, super active guys that are creative and used to making stuff. And so for them to just, you know, sit on their hands at home for 6-8 weeks is it's a little bit nerve wracking for them. And, you know, and then of course, you know, they know that I'm here working, but that's, you know, so that I'm sure that's another, you know, element of kind of, you know, just anxiety for them. And I try to let them know that, look, I'm just here organizing, getting things more lined up so that when you guys get back, we're, you know, going to just hit the ground running. So, but we're doing good.
I actually appreciate that because technically you could probably space out and do all that, but I think it's really great that you're adhering to the guidelines and keeping everyone safe. I think that's just it's just a testament to who you are and who you seem to be and who I've heard you to be. And so I think it's really awesome of you, and also to be a part of our virtual event. So, which I appreciate that they're doing that as well, because we all don't want to miss out on what's going on in the world. And I think this is a perfect way to bring some of the greatest people. I interviewed Zwart and Jeff Zwart. I call him Zwart because it's Instagram. And Johnny Lieberman. And we're going to be interviewing Jennifer Malakarn as well. So I love that everyone huge is coming to us and sharing their stories. And we really appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, this whole Porsche community it's really my life and everybody that, you know, are involved in it worldwide. And it's really what, you know, my wife and kids and I kind of surround our life around. So anything we can do to support the communities, you know, definitely something we want to do.
I think that's awesome. And I see some cars behind you. I see those are the main ones in sort of that main gallery that when you walk in, which people probably don't realize that are pretty impressive cars behind you. The one I can see behind the 46 is the first one that we actually discussed online because I had posted it. And I was kind of new to Instagram with it. I posted it. I double checked, triple checked whose car it was. And I said it was Jerry Seinfeld's, and it was not. And you were so nice to actually tell me whose car it was and what it was about. And you shared some photos of your, I think it was your secret location. This is not your secret location, right? That you're at?
Well, I mean, all of our locations are a little bit secret. I do that on purpose because you know, for me, it's all about building cars and you know, being as active as we possibly can. And if we were just open to the public all the time, it'd be crazy, and we wouldn't get the work done that we want to. But as you know, with our open house and letting our address out in the public, it's not quite as secret. But we also have another secret location up in Oregon, which is that photo that I sent you is it's actually kind of a bunker in the side of a hill in the Willamette Valley, kind of wine country area where we stash a bunch of cars.
So now everyone's digging around in that area. They're looking for those cars. So tell us about Oregon. You lived up there, or you have a farm up there? What's going on with that?
So I grew up in Southern California. I went to high school. I was born in Newport Beach, and then went to high school in Mission Viejo, went to Trabuco Hills High School. And
I'm from Mission Viejo.
Are you really?
Yeah, I was supposed to go to Mission Viejo High School, but I moved to Lake Tahoe after that. But I grew up for my beginning years from Mission Viejo. That's funny.
Yeah, so I graduated from Trabuco Hills, and then went to the Northwest, like right after high school. And really that's where kind of my business started, because I was racing a Porsche at the Portland Historics in 1992. And the guy that started Kettle Potato Chips, or Kettle Foods, he was sponsoring the event, and came up to me in 1992 and said, I love watching you go around the track. Your car's amazing. You're winning all the races. Would you consider building a car for me? And so here I am, 18 years old, and racing, and and I wanted to be a professional race car driver, just like every young kid, but I didn't have the family resources to be able to really do that as a profession. But then when I had Cameron Healy, the founder of Kettle Foods, approach me, it was like, well, wait, here's a guy that wants me to build a car for him, take him racing, and I can be paid to be at the track. And that's how the business started, and why I planted my feet in Portland, because his factory was in Salem, Oregon. So that was about 92 is when I made my way up to the Northwest.
So what, forgive me if I'm being ignorant, what car were you racing at the time?
I was racing a 1953 Porsche, which it's a little blue 356 with the number 80 on it in yellow. That was my first car that I built. I built that car when I was 14 years old, and started racing it here locally in Southern California during high school. Willow Springs, that type of stuff. But then while racing the Portland Historics in 92, that's really when it was like, wow, it's like the light bulb went off. Like I can actually make a career out of building Porsches and going to the track and doing that. So that's kind of how it all started for me. So that was 92. Planted my feet just outside of Portland in a little town called McMinnville, Oregon, which is right in the middle of the Willamette Valley, which is like where all the Oregon Pinot Noirs is grown. And that's really where my business began. Amy and I officially started Emery Motorsports and started building race cars, taking people racing all over. And then we had this event in 1994. We had our first what we call Emery Porsche Campout. And we invited everybody in the Porsche community to bring their tents and their little 356s and essentially camp in our backyard. And it started an annual event that I think we had about 150 at the first one. And then it got as big as 1,500 people. We did it every year. We did it every year from 94 until 2012. So it was an annual event. And it's an event that people would travel all over the world to come to, because I've got 50 acres in Oregon, a little farmhouse right in the middle, and all of my buildings where I was building all these cars all through the 90s and early 2000s. And then we've got about a 13-acre campground on the perimeter of our property that everybody just brings their tents and Porsches, and it's just an amazing event. So we did it every year.
Everyone should have 13 acres of campground. That's what I say. I would just love to extend my Newport Beach home to 13 acres of campground. And then I would have you over, but I can't right now. So.
Yeah, well, Oregon real estate's a little bit different than Newport Beach. So, you can have 50 acres and a really great farmhouse and 20,000 square feet of buildings for the same price as about a 1,200 square foot house here in the Valley. So, it's just a different environment, but that was the home of the Emery Porsche Campout, and we did it every year until 2012. And then in 2017, we did like a 5-year reunion and had about 1,000 people. And since 2020, was going to be our 20th event. We thought, we'll just do this amazing, you know, party camp out event, and it was scheduled for the second week in July. But as we all know, every event, including just heard Pebble Beach, got canceled. So
Yeah.
everything that we're also used to has changed for this year. So the camp out is going to be postponed till 2021, and I'll make sure you're there. You have to be there.
I will definitely be coming. It sounds like an amazing event. I'm going to try to bring some sort of funky trailer. I think I'm going to try to work somebody to give me one. Maybe this interview will help me.
There you go.
But so growing up, I've done some of looking back and checking out your history and stuff, but it just seems like it's been generations that you've been involved. I mean, there was nowhere else you were probably going to go, because your grandfather was a detailer, correct? And
he had a shop called Valley Custom Shop.
Yes.
He was detailing cars when he was a kid, and then
earlier.
Yeah, and then he started Valley Custom Shop, and that's a custom car building shop that he's in the Hot Rod Hall of Fame, and was really one of the pioneers of customizing old American hot rods.
And also, didn't he do a specific car that broke the land speed record in 1949 or 50? Yep. Or both, maybe?
1949 and then again in 1950. So there's a car that Bruce Meyer owns that is the belly tanker, which is basically it's shaped, it's a fuel tank that off the plane that was turned into a land speed car. My grandfather first did the metal work on that, and then a few years later he built this SoCal Streamliner, which was the first hot rod over 200 miles an hour, and he did that in 49, and then they again in 1950. And so yeah, he was really a pioneer in hot rodding and custom car building.
So then you said you were born in Newport Beach, and your dad had what I think was the most interesting thing that he was able to do, is to procure parts that were not leftover parts, but parts that couldn't be stored by Volkswagen.
Yeah. So my grandfather in 1961 closed his shop down and moved the family to Newport Beach. So his shop, Valley Custom Shop, was right here in Burbank. And then in 1961, he moved the family to Newport Beach, and he was the body shop manager at Chick Iverson Volkswagen Porsche, which is now the Porsche dealership that's still there in Newport Beach. And my dad, after he graduated high school, he started detailing cars at the dealership, and then became parts manager of the Porsche dealership. So as Porsche was changing all of the models through the 60s, because as we all know, Porsche just kept evolving and changing. There was the 356, then the 911 came out, and the 911 model continued to change. It was short wheelbase, then in 1969 it was long wheelbase, and went from carburetors to mechanical fuel injection, and all these cool milestones that Porsche was developing on the cars. But the dealerships having to maintain and service all those cars, it was hard for them to inventory the service and repair parts that they needed for those cars, because at the time the Porsche dealership parts departments were the size of a large bedroom. They weren't like massive, rooms. And so there was big distribution warehouses around the United States. The biggest one in California was in Culver City. And Volkswagen was actually the company that was contracted by Porsche to distribute those parts, because Porsche just didn't have the infrastructure to distribute the parts and manage the inventory. So Volkswagen was contracted to do it. Well, these big warehouses like this one in Culver City was, massive. And all the parts that, like if you were a parts manager and you had brake pads, but you had a massive overstock of brake pads, and you just didn't have room on the shelves for the next model, then you'd send them all back to this warehouse. Mm-hmm. Well, the warehouse started filling up. I mean, you can imagine a Costco sized building full of Porsche parts, and it was literally spilling out of the seams. And Volkswagen was pushing the stuff out a back door, putting it into trash containers and throwing it away, or crushing it.
Crazy. That is crazy, isn't it? Just to think of that now, it's crazy.
Yeah. So, my dad went to Chick the owner of the dealership. He says, Chick, you can't let these parts just be thrown away and destroyed. We're going to need, those 4-cam engine parts. We're going to need those annular brakes. We're going to need those, 911, fog lights and roof racks down the road. They can't just be thrown away. So my dad and Chick Iverson made a deal with Porsche and Volkswagen of America to buy everything they considered distributor obsolescence. So that's anything that's like overstock or just stuff that they didn't need in the dealers, but they had to buy it all. It was not, they couldn't cherry pick it. And so they got a big warehouse in the first warehouse was right by the Orange County Airport, and then they couldn't do retail out of there. So then they took over they got the building where Period Correct is at.
Yeah.
And on Randolph Avenue, and they started filling it, and it filled up like immediately. I mean, it was, you can imagine semi trucks backing in with big pallets of, original 356, steering wheels, like 100 of them, or, 914, tops, a stack of like 50 of them, just all these amazing parts. And so my dad started a company, Porsche Parts Obsolete, and they were really the supplier worldwide for vintage Porsche parts all through the 70s and 80s. And that's where I grew up. My playground was a warehouse full of new old stock original Porsche parts. And I'd build go-karts out of stuff. Every school project I had was done with these little lacquer paint sticks that were touch-up sticks. Today those little original ones are worth about $200 or $300 a piece.
Oh my gosh.
My dad had let me go and fill my backpack up with them, and I'd take them home. And that's how I'd do all of my school projects, was with original Porsche lacquer paint sticks. So that's how I grew up. I really didn't know, anything else but Porsches and cars. And, it was an amazing way to grow up.
So your soapbox derby cars had Fuchs on it, something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The coolest kid on the block for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, so I grew up, working around my grandfather. He taught me he ran the body shop at the Porsche dealership. And so he taught me how to weld at a young age and how to work on cars. And then my dad's not a mechanical guy. He's a parts salesman and a design guy. But my dad had all these really crazy, cool ideas, and didn't quite have the mechanical talent that his father did. But it's we always joke around, it skipped a generation.
Yeah.
And so I became those hands for my dad's ideas. And at 10, 12, 14 years old, my dad would buy a little A coupe, and I would lower it and polish the drums and, mount fog lights on it and, work on the engine. And it was just something that just drove me to love these cars. And I'm still doing it. Here I am 30 years professionally into this, and I've built, just over 30 years, but, and I've built just at 200 cars,
Wow.
Complete restorations.
Wow, that's amazing. I think it's interesting too, because of your age, that a lot of the kids that would be your age, the kids your age these days, would be maybe more into the 911, and that you were just so drawn to the 356. Maybe it was because of your grandfather's influence, or because usually what was on our walls was 911s.
Right.
And so for you to be your age and be so into the history and culture, and also your first car being a 356, I saw some pictures of it, so we'll hopefully put that up as well, because all of the car, it's amazing that that's your first car. And I don't even know that people understood how cool it was at the time, but just to think back that was your first car is kind of crazy in this moment, knowing how much 356s are worth too.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little barn find that my dad and I found, and we paid less than $2,000 for it, and it was typical rusty, missing parts. And my dad helped me out with it and said, look, this is your first project to do solo. And because I loved racing, and because I grew up racing bicycles and motorcycles and all that, and wanted to be a race car driver, I naturally built it so that I could race it and drive it on the street. And it's, for me, but I love 911s, and I've got a few, and I'm my son and I are actually getting ready to build another early 911 together. But the reason I'm so drawn to 356s is really just, like you said, my grandfather and my father's influence, and me being around them so much. And because my first car was a 356, and I raced it, and I recognized like how much potential there is in that little car. And it's just now it's still something that, every time I see one, I smile, and that's 150,000 times a week, it seems like, because I'm walking through the shop, but everybody always asks, why are you so happy? And it's I've got an amazing family, and I've built a really fun business and great crew, and I get to do absolutely something that I love and adore every single day.
It's funny, that doesn't go away. My boyfriend actually built the little 911 that we have, 1969 911T. And we will make a drink and sit in the garage and stare at them like lunatics. So I understand that. It's how we kind of bonded. On our first date, we talked about what was your favorite car? And I said, oh, definitely Porsche. And he said, this is going to work out just fine. Literally said that. So we, sometimes, I mean, he's even more of a lunatic than me. He'll just sit there and I'll walk out. I go, where are you? And he's just like, just looking at it. I'm just tinkering, thinking of the next thing or whatever. And I actually just bought a little beater to run around the track with the girls, and just a super cheap Boxster, salvage. It's terrible, but it's so great. And it's a manual, so I can really beat it up and have fun. It's got air conditioning, which is my heaven, having two air-cooled cars. So, and he just loves tinkering on that too. So I'm very fortunate to be able to pick up something and be like, okay, here you go. Please make it perfect. So I appreciate that smile that is always on your face when you walk into the garage, and the pride. And your garage, walking around that garage on Lit Week, I just walked around alone, and I hadn't run into Jen yet, and I was in awe of the absolute, like, obviously maybe it was a little cleaner than usual, but I don't think so. I think you keep it the way that it was generally, because I've seen you do little videos about how you clean things off and blow it off, and everything's blown every day. And it is such an incredible shop, and so meticulous. And you are such a perfectionist, as is proven by your cars. But what were you like that as a kid? Because racing and being a perfectionist, I mean, there is something to it. If you're a really good racer, you have to be a little bit of a perfectionist to just be safe and all that. But were you a rebel, or did racing get that out for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's everything in my life is very detail oriented. And, I look at things probably different than some people do. And, when I walk through the shop, I'm, every little corner, every little area, every drawer is important to me, because the stuff that's in it is important. But also I want to make sure that things have their place, that my employees know where to find stuff. And everything has such great, a pretty significant value. So, like even a little knob or a little bezel that goes on on a switch, every piece has value. And so for me, it's really just making sure that everything is cared for. And so, my bedroom as a kid was a disaster because I didn't spend any time there. But my workshop, we had a big barn. I grew up actually in Trabuco Canyon, which is a little dirt road canyon, and my parents owned the grocery store kind of at the mouth of that canyon. And we had this cool little house and a big barn, and my dad's side of the barn was just stuffed full of stuff. My dad, he's a collector, and he just stacked it full. But then on the side of it was kind of this shed roof shop that was where I would build motorcycles and work on that stuff. And I had everything just super dialed in. You open the drawers of my toolbox and the tools are all lined up. And, at the time, my vinyl records were all alphabetical, on the shelf next to my record player. And just, because it was everything that I love. I just want it to be detailed and take good care of it. And so that just carried through in my business life. When you walk through our shop, we don't have a white, epoxy floor, and it's not that type of, like, hospital clean environment, because it's like an old school craftsman workshop. All of our tools are very old, but very well taken care of. And I just like everything to have a place, and everything to have, a purpose, and a process, just like when we're building our cars. So
the other thing that is very, very disturbing to me is that you get up, I think, around 3:30 in the morning. I went to bed the other night at 3:30. So I can't even, I'm such a night person. I almost don't get going until, like, I didn't want to do this interview till 1 because I'm almost ready to do it. Like, I'm almost awake. I'm not that I'm sleeping until then, but I think I come alive around 4.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm going until 4 o'clock, or well, not probably 1 o'clock in the morning. But so you wake up at 3:30, you are the first in that shop. And I appreciate that you get a lot more done, because nobody on the planet is awake at that time other than another time zone.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's, ever since I was a little kid, I really only require maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep. It's just how I've been my whole life. And so my mom and dad always told me that, as long as I did good in school, and got good grades, I kind of was free to do whatever I wanted with the rest of my day. And so I was always a straight A student, and just knocked school right out so that I could create and do things. And so I told you about this little workshop I had next to, in our barn. I'd get up in the morning, I didn't have to be to school till 8. And so I would go out and work in the workshop for a couple hours, and then take a shower and go to school. And so my kind of life cycle has always been that way, or my sleep cycle. And when I started, building a business with employees, I realized that having an earlier morning, and me getting there a couple hours before them, I could get everything like lined out. So like when the employees show up in the morning, I get up at 3:30. I'm usually in the workshop by 4:15 at the latest. They all show up at 6 a.m. So that gives me an hour. I get here, I can knock out any emails or do whatever BS I have to in the office, because I don't really like being in the office. I'd rather just knock it out. And then I can be out in the workshop by 5 a.m. and lining out their day, like making sure they have, the door shims that they need, so that when they show up, everything's sitting on their workbench. And then by about 5:50, I'm already like working in my workstation. So when they show up, I'm already working. They're super stoked because the shop is clean and blown out and dialed in. There's no trash in the trash cans, and they can just go to work, and they know the boss is already working. So let's just get after it. And it's just always been this kind of, culture that I've created. And when I bring a new employee on, they're always a little bit hesitant, because, they're like, oh man, 6 a.m., there's no way. But once they realize all the benefits, especially being in Southern California, there's no traffic on the way into work.
Mm-hmm.
There's no traffic on the way home, and as an employer, I don't have to worry about them like needing to take off, because they work from 6 till about 2:30. So they've got still the late afternoon to do anything like go to the bank or go to the dentist or whatever, those types of things. So there's a lot of added benefits for us me as an employer, because they can do all that stuff after work. But the main reason that I love it for my employees is because they can be home, like when the kids get out of school, they can be home for dinner every day. They can help their wife out by, going to the grocery store on their way home. And so there's all these little added benefits by just shifting your day early. And, it kind of gives them a life outside of work. And, they hesitate in the beginning, but it also keeps me from having any heavy partiers at the workshop, because people that stay up and party all night, they're not going to show up at 6 a.m. So
I still wouldn't make it. And I'm not a heavy partier. So I don't know. I think that we're all made at different times. You're definitely living in like a New York time zone since you were 14. So
yeah.
you're just up with the New Yorkers. It's fine. So the first outlaw, or the word outlaw, is usually attributed to you. Am I wrong? Or to me, that's when I've heard outlaw, it's, I don't know if it was always a positive thing. And then it is such a positive thing now. Everyone's modifying their cars even slightly, and you do such a tasteful I wouldn't even call it outlawed now, but I mean, just to do any kind of change was probably pretty crazy back in the day. What kind of reactions did you get back then, changing the perfect line of a German car, and daring to take on or challenge, their engineering? Did
Yeah.
you get any pushback?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's that. So if you look back, late 80s, about the time that I was building my first car, my dad was selling all of these parts to everybody that had an original 356 or an original 69 911 that they wanted to make perfect. That the 80s were like a full Concours era. Everybody wanted their cars, full Concours, and usually better than they came off the assembly line. I mean, most restorers that are doing full Concours restorations, they're making them better than they ever were, which is amazing. The craftsmanship is there. So here my dad's selling parts to all these people all over the world for their full Concours restorations. And then, he's got these cool ideas, and he's got his 13, 14-year-old son in the back of the workshop helping him, take these cars and modify them and lowering them and putting Sebring exhausts on them and louvering the deck lids. And so my dad and I were just really playing around and giving kind of our personal touch to these cars. And a couple of his customers came up to him and they're like, "Oh man, you guys are outlaws." They would kind of harass us, and it was just kind of a harassment thing in the beginning. You can't do that. It's blasphemy. The Porsche community is going to hate you, and they did, in a sense. I mean, they didn't hate us, but it was like, look, you guys are you're modifying these cars. We weren't the first ones to modify Porsches. I mean, come on, James Dean took the hubcaps off and put a Pegasus horse on his Speedster and went and raced it. There was a lot of people that were modifying them, but that term outlaw was kind of given to us in the late 80s because it was just kind of what we were doing. And Freeman Thomas, who's the famous Ford designer, and they designed the Beetle, his brother-in-law James is a jeweler, and James made this little badge for us that said 356 Outlaws, and we started putting it on the cars that we were building. And it just kind of, in the beginning, it was just kind of a fun thing. Like, well, we know the car isn't a full Concours. We're not even trying to. It's, it's our little underground group. And we'd put that badge on there. But we'd go to Porsche, like PCA events, for example, and there was no class. You couldn't show an outlaw. People would be like, no, there isn't even a place for it. So whenever we'd go to the events, we'd have to park out in the parking lot. I mean, there was one event that we parked in the dirt, and it's like, come on, So in the beginning,
I'm not letting you in the gates. How dare you? How dare you bring that terrible, perfect car now into
right? Exactly. But in the 80s, it was all about full Concours originality and perfect cars, and so that just kind of stuck. And it was so the cars we were building were just kind of coined as outlaws. And fast forward about 15. 20 years, and all of a sudden, the 356 registry and PCA and everybody are like, oh, there's an outlaw, modified class. Oh, that doesn't really work. Hot rod, that doesn't really work. Outlaws. And so then that term kind of started taking shape. And then, there's certain characters out there that coined themselves as outlaws, and, Magnus, and that kind of brought more kind of, visibility to the word outlaw as it's associated with Porsche. And so kind of a combination of, us, 30 years of calling our cars outlaws, then the clubs, and then, characters like Magnus. It just kind of, took shape as a term that is really, about modifying and personalizing Porsches.
Even recently, when we were doing our 911, we got the paint code, and it was silver when we got it, and it was Irish green. So we were like, okay. So I just said, we've got to do what we will love. We are getting in it, and we can always paint it another color, or someone else can do that later. But we even got pushback on that. So just the fact that you would change a fender or do anything different, or do the RSR. I mean, the pushback, is kind of interesting, but now everyone is gravitating towards it. So I think it's great. And I know I was watching a live with Magnus the other day, and he was talking about how you did a die for him that was for the slots on the fender. And so
Yeah.
you've done some really cool things that have been, it's really, and just, you're an artisan, as even more than just a car builder. You're making them your own and giving it your own flair, and you're an artist, you know. And it seems like it runs in the family with your son and your daughter, who is, sometimes you post her on the hoop, the aerial, she's an aerial acrobat, or
she is, yeah, an aerialist, yeah.
Aerialist. It's so crazy. So it does run in the family, that art form, I think, and even from your grandfather hammering cars into shapes and doing things and hot rodding, that it just kind of carried down. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather, you know, he would always tell me as a kid, you know, modify everything, but make it look like it hasn't been modified. And that's really kind of my approach when I'm building these cars, is to try to take the foundation of what Porsche built, because I mean, I absolutely love everything about what Porsche built. But I look at like the 356 and I'm like, well, they stopped building it in 1965. So if I put my, you know, kind of design hat on and say, how would Porsche have pushed the envelope a little bit, or how would they evolved or changed the car? And I try to, when I'm modifying them, try to do it as if Porsche might have done it. Even the crazy wacky RSR that you mentioned, I mean, you know, that car was, you know, about 30 years after I built my first car. When I built my first one, people were like, oh my gosh, this thing's, you know, I made it a split windshield and put body bumpers on it and louvered it and did all these crazy things, which 30 years ago was like, wow, you know, all these modifications. So I was like, you know, I got to build another car to just kind of shake people up a little bit. You know, and I love the 935. And so I'm like, well, what if Porsche would have continued building the 356 and, you know, would have built one for competition and you know, made the body panels just remove and be focused more on performance rather than, you know, sleek styling. Because, you know, the 935, you look at them, they're awkward, wild looking beasts. And so, you know, for me, it's always just kind of looking at the car and saying, how would Porsche have evolved or changed, you know, the platform a little bit. And yeah, that's what makes it fun for me.
And do you have customers who come in and they're like, okay, this is what I want to do, and you're like, this is not going to happen because your name is on it?
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot of things that I won't do. And, you know, I get people all the time that ask me, oh, you know, will you put a Subaru engine, or will you do this, or, you know, I had a guy, you know, had these taillights that were like a Corvette taillight. I'm like, no, you know, I mean, not a chance. And even down to colors, you know, I'm pretty particular on color. Even though you know, just like you know, as you look at a car, you think, I don't need to do it back the original color, because there's plenty of, you know, stock C coupes in red, you know, it's like, come on, there's plenty of them. Let's have a little fun with it. But what I'll typically do is start with a Porsche original color and then tweak it and change it from there, is typically like the direction that I go. But if I have somebody that comes to me and wants a certain color, I'll usually nudge them in a certain direction. And
which is probably usually black, silver, gray.
Well, I mean, obviously my personal cars are, yeah, black, silver, and gray. But, you know, like in the workshop right now, we have one that's speed yellow. We have one that's Valley blue. We have one that's geyser gray. We've got, you know, another one that's kind of a turquoise kind of teal color. So we've got a lot of really cool colors of cars that we're building.
Sure. Is there any modification you've done on a car where you did it, you thought it was going to be great, it was on paper, and you said, I have to rip that off, that is terrible, I can't stand it? Is there a story where you've made a mistake, or it still lives out there and it's a mistake, or anything that you feel uncomfortable with that's got your name on it?
I don't really think there's anything that I'm uncomfortable with that's out there. I mean, obviously everything, there's some cars that I built, you know, 20, 25 years ago that are a little bit more dated just because of maybe the paint or the numbers that we put on them or something like that. I try to typically do stuff so that it's kind of timeless, so that it doesn't look like we built it in 1999, you know, so that it'll kind of last the test of time. You know, obviously anytime I'm building a car, it's a creative process. I do sketch things a little bit, but pretty much it's like I have a vision of what I want, and I already know what the car is going to look like before I even start doing any work on it. So I just have to take it to that finish line. And, there's always going to be a few little things that I kind of move around or change. I might, move the headlights in a certain position and then go, and spend a week doing all this work. And then I'm like, once it's on wheels and, the fender arches are done, I'm like, that's just not right. And I'll cut it off and redo it. So, there's nothing out there that, that I've built that I look at and go, oh, geez, why the hell did I do that? Because I think all of it is just a creative piece from that point in time.
So, okay. So it's kind of, this business has grown in your family to some degree. It's kind of evolved into Emery Motorsports. Where do you envision it going forward? Your son is, not that your son is the only person who could keep the business running, but your son is an actor. Your daughter seems to be into the arts as well. Do you see it moving forward as Emery Motorsports with family members?
Yeah,
or?
Like you mentioned, my son, he's on a couple TV shows, and my daughter's an aerialist, and they have their own passion and drive and desire for their profession, but they do love this business. My daughter is out right now with my wife, helping me, sort and pack all of our parts in these new hardware cabinets. And Zane's out working on his 911 right now. And so the passion is there, and always will be for my children. I think for them, I want them to have the freedom to do whatever they choose in life, just like I had the freedom, even though my dad was in the Porsche parts business, and I started a business building Porsches, but so my kids definitely are involved. Whether, if all of a sudden I wasn't on the planet, for some reason, they would pick right up and do whatever's necessary to keep it going. I know that for a fact, but I want them. I've still got a good 30 years, I think, of, I'm 46 years old. I think at least 30 years of building cars, kind of the way that I am now. And, I think by that time, my kids have talked about having families and all that other stuff. So I think it's, time is going to just sort that out. And I think this legacy will carry on in the family. I do have a nephew that works for me, that's worked for me for Luke Gilmet. He's been working for me since right out of high school. So he's head of our assembly area in the shop. So even though he doesn't share the same last name, he shares the spirit and blood of the family. And so, it's always going to be a family business,
So, and last few things before I actually will let you go. You've done quite a lot, so it's your fault this is going so long. I'm sorry.
No problem.
So you raced in Daytona last year in the classics. How did that go? And are you going to continue doing any racing in the future, or are you racing more than that? I've only know about the Daytona thing.
Yeah, I mean, this whole business began because of racing. I was racing my little 356 and did about 12 to 15 races a year for 20 years. And then in about 2004, 2005, I ran a GT3 Cup car in the Rolex series. So I raced the 24 Hours of Daytona a couple of years, and that whole series that surrounded it. So I've always been racing. It's just been, a part of my life. The last few years, it's been shifted back to just doing vintage racing again, and raced at Rennsport and Monterey and some of those events. But you brought up the Daytona Classic. One of my mentors in this business and one of my closest friends, Kevin Jeanette at Gunner Racing, he's always been there for me. I've always been there for him, and for the last 20 years, he's been, he's the man when it comes to restoring prototype, fiberglass type Porsches or composite Porsches, anything that's fiberglass or carbon fiber, whether it's 962s, 917s, 908s, he's the man. And when I was restoring a 906 about 20 years ago, he provided a lot of really great knowledge and resources for me to be able to accomplish that restoration and do it at a top level. And so my relationship with him has always been just amazing. I mean, I call him Uncle Kevin because we are like family. And so every year, we do these events and we go racing together, whether it's Rennsport or the Daytona Classic, and we'll race again at Daytona this year. We've already got it all figured out. I can't tell you the details, but it's, you know, last year, if you watched it, it was a really amazing display of cars and drivers. It was all Lowenbrow themed, and we were driving the Holbert Racing Lowenbrow 962, a 997 GT3 Cup car that was Lowenbrow, and the 944 Lowenbrow car. And you know, it was Derek Bell. I mean, you know, legendary Derek Bell and his son Justin.
There are a lot of bells. I always think I got the right one, and then I'm like, no, there's another bell. There's a lot of bells, right?
There are, but you know, really, the when it comes to like Porsche racing, you know, Derek Bell is the man, and you know, his son Justin. So we had those two guys, and then we had Al Holbert's son, Todd Holbert, driving with us, and then one of my clients and good friends, Rodrigo, that owns the Lowenbrow 962, and so we just had this, you know, and then Kevin Jeanette's son, Gunnar Jeanette. So we had this really cool driver lineup, and we just had an amazing time. So we'll be back at Daytona this year at the Daytona Classic, with an even cooler, bigger, better team and crew. And you know, vintage racing is so fun because, you know, it's not, you know, it's like racing at 8/10. It's not, you're not out there tearing each other's fenders off, but the racing is really good. The cars are amazing, but it's the event, you know. I mean, as you know, the Porsche and these cars that we have are really just a vehicle that bring our community together, right? I mean,
Yes.
And give us reasons to drive up, you know, Angeles Crest and go have breakfast, or have, you know, a picnic, or, you know, gather at PEC for cars and coffee. You know, these cars really are more than transportation. It's something special, and it's that glue that binds us all together.
It is, for me, it's been eye-opening to see how close the community is. And I think even this virtual event has been proof of that, that we all are still trying to stay together, and everyone's coming out, like you and Jeff and Johnny, just to support the Porsche community. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to California Festival of Speed. So it's really great. Last question: where do you see yourself in 10 years, or is there some sort of frontier you want to cross? Is there something a mountain you want to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just continuing to build cars like I'm building. That's, you know, that's kind of the foundation of what I'm doing. But I've got a couple of cars that are in the works. One that I won't go into detail. That's going to be a little bit kind of a game changer. That's a little more blending of I think, you know, the 356 and Porsche that's in me, but also going back to the roots of my grandfather and some of the custom car building that he did. So yeah, there's a car that probably 4 or 5 years from now, everybody will go, wow, you know, that's something different. Not everybody will love it. Not, you know, it's that's kind of part of the nature of customizing and all that. Is, you know, it's, you're not, I don't, when I build a car, it's not like I'm going to build a car. I don't look at it and say, I'm going to build a car that everybody's going to love.
Mm-hmm.
I build a car that it comes out of a vision, and there's going to be certain people that are going to love it and appreciate it, and some that are going to be like, what the hell did you do, you know? But I've got that car, plus I mentioned that my son and I are just getting ready. We're just starting a project, which the first car that I rode in the day I came home from the hospital was a short wheelbase 65 911 that was originally a red 65 911, and my dad put RSR flares on it and IROC tail, and it was, and that's the car that I rode to and from the hospital in my first day on this earth. That car's long gone, and so I searched for a long time to find another original red 65 911 that was a basket case that I could build a car out of, and I found it. And so my son and I are going to restore that car and build it as a tribute to that first car that I rode in. And by the way, that same kind of tradition carried on with Zane. I had a 69 fat fender 911 that Amy and I, took him to and from the hospital in. Wasn't the car that I was in, but it still a 911. And so we've got that car that we're building together that most people don't realize how many 911s I've built. I've built about 20 over the years,
Okay.
because they always kind of just look at me as, the 356 guy. But I've built quite a few 911s over the course of 30 years. But this one will be pretty special. Not groundbreakingly different, just emotionally something that I'm looking forward to.
Again, bringing, full circle, bringing your family back into it. I think it's great that you're doing that with your son. And it's funny, you've mentioned coming home from the hospital. It was the same situation for me. I was in a convertible Austin Healey. It wasn't quite a Porsche, but I would have loved for it to be a convertible, not convertible. Well, yeah, maybe a 356. But yeah, I came home in the arms of my mom. It was a little different time back then. But
yes, definitely.
So that's great. And on the note of that new car, is it on paper or have you already started plucking away at it?
A little of both. No, I've got the car, I've got the wheels, I've got the flares, we're already starting to kind of build the engine and put the pieces together that we need for it. So, the goal is, it's not like an overnight job. It's a 2-year project, and there's some really cool stuff that surrounds it.
Well, I'm sure that everyone will be excited to see it, and hopefully you'll do some sort of rollout party and we can check it out when you unveil it. I'm sure everyone would love to see that. Well, thank you so much for taking this interview and for taking a chance on me, not even knowing exactly who I am, but I really appreciate meeting you and for you to join in on this virtual event for California Festival of Speed. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day and get back to work.
I'm on it. All right.
All right. Bye.